In the middle of Psalm 19, David notes how the Lord's laws are a path to happiness. That's how we said it in yesterday's video anyway, which, as we mentioned yesterday, can be kind of tricky for us sometimes because we don't always do a good job of following God's laws. Well, towards the end of Psalm 19, David says, it's actually worse than we think. Like, we are actually worse than we could ever imagine. We get an indicator of that in his prayer, or where he says, forgive my hidden faults. Who can discern his errors? Who has the ability even to see how corrupt and sinful their heart is? And he's saying we don't. He says, keep your servant also from willful sins, the sins that we know about, the sins that we know we're committing. And we can identify some sins in our life, and even those all by themselves, at least in my own experience, you get like the double whammy of not only realizing that you committed a sin, that you did something that was wrong in God's sight, but so often that has a negative impact on somebody that you care about. And that hurts too, that you hurt somebody that you love, and now they have to carry a heavier burden, or they have to live with the consequence of something that you did. And that all by itself, when we know what we have done, is difficult enough to live with sometimes, very difficult. But then David reminds us that there's even more going on in our heart. There's more corruption, there's more sin, there's more ugliness that we aren't even aware of. But David knows that God is aware of it. And so if we were to consider all of that and know all of it, as overwhelming as the things we know about can sometimes be, how overwhelming would it be to know everything? And where do you go with that knowledge? Well, thankfully, that's not the end of Psalm 19. The end of Psalm 19 is this. It's another prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. And the prayer itself is a good prayer, that God would help us to be obedient, that God would help us to live in a way that helps us live with a clean conscience, in a way that wouldn't have a negative impact on anybody else's life. But there are three terms that he uses that are especially helpful as we offer that prayer. Three titles for God: Lord, Rock, and Redeemer. And so Lord, all capitals in the Bible, that connects God with a promise that God made. When he said he wanted to be known as the Lord, and what about the Lord? That he's gracious and compassionate, it says in Isaiah, and slow to anger and abounding in love. He's gracious, he's compassionate, he's slow to anger, he's abounding in love. When you hear that term, God wants us to remember all those wonderful characteristics of God, characteristics that he has promised to apply to your life and how he interacts with you in your life. The second title, Rock, of course, is another wonderful thing, because that's an assurance of what God is. A rock is solid. We're not waiting for a rock to become solid. A rock is solid. You can count on it in the present to be solid. And so that's a reminder that everything that God promises to be, he already is for you. He's already gracious towards you. He's already compassionate. He's already slow to get angry, and he's already is abounding in love. He is those things so that you can count on it in the moment, and it does not at all depend on how you acted up until this very moment. In the present, God is a rock. He is all of those things that he promises. And then the last title, so he's the Lord, he's a rock, and he's also our Redeemer. And a Redeemer is somebody, it's a reminder of something that God did. And a Redeemer is somebody who paid a price. They bought something at tremendous cost. They bought it back from something. God bought you back from sin. He redeemed you. He paid a price to bring you into his family. And the price was nothing less than the Son of God himself. He redeemed you. He did that. And in redeeming you, he forgave you of all the sins that you know about and all the ones that you never will. You're forgiven. You're clean. You're His. And you get to go forward the rest of your life knowing that your Lord, your rock, your Redeemer is going to treat your entire life and everybody connected with it with the grace and compassion that He promised you from the very beginning. Rest well tonight, my friends.